I'm at Rich Mountain Gap, which is just above 4,400 feet. So I'm starting a little higher, and the mountain is a little shorter. I think it's around 5,300 feet. And these people are just coming down from it, so I think it's just a 900-foot climb straight up. Here's the gap, very open, windswept, and that is the trail coming from the south side of Snake Mountain, which is a lot steeper. This is brutal so far. I know it's just a field, but there's no trail, so I'm just basically going straight up, not really making my own switchbacks, which I should be doing. Roughly following the track. But it's going to be a short climb, but a really steep one. There's some people right there starting the climb up Snake Mountain. I guess there's a trail on the left and a really steep forest road track on the right. But you can see how steep it looks. That looks a lot steeper than the north route, which I came up. So Rich Mountain Bald is somewhere up there. I just checked the contour. It's around 5340, so still pretty high. It's gorgeous out today. I'm really exhausted though already. I started going left, trying to pick up the track I have on my phone, which doesn't really go straight up that open field. And it wasn't the best decision, because all through that section for the last few hundred yards was just thorns lining the trail. That would be awful with shorts and short sleeves on. But now, a little bit more open, faint trail to follow, beautiful views. It is pretty brutal. Getting close to the 5,000 foot contour, which means I've gained over 500 feet in a pretty short distance. It's just freaking straight up. It's beautiful though. There's so many of these little faint trails crisscrossing everywhere, and because this is part of the Elk Knob game lands, you know, it's not necessarily hikers, it's hunters looking for good places. So eventually I gotta make my way somewhere up there. Almost to the top, about 100 feet below the summit, maybe less. I'm around the mile-high contour, and it's a pretty interesting forest here. You know, also a northern hardwood type forest, but it's a couple hundred feet lower than the ash forest on Snake Mountain, and it's also not that exposed, so these trees are a bit bigger, and there might be a more heterogeneous mixture of hardwoods compared to Snake Mountain. But I'm almost there. That was a tough climb. At the top of Rich Mountain Bald, checked my GPS, it said it was 5,372 feet. Looking north at Snake Mountain with that open area, the southern peak where I took a snack break. You know, it's weird, about 40 feet that way there is a barbed wire fence protecting the summit, saying this is a plant conservation preserve and there's no trespassing without a permit. And I've never read that anywhere, and I feel kind of bad, but I'm doing it anyway because a lot of people have bagged this peak, and I'll just not post it on Hiking Upward, I guess. But it seems like there's a nice forest road track beyond this, so gonna get some awesome views. I don't advocate trespassing, but this is actually public land from what I can gather, and part of the Elk Knob game lands, and maybe one of the conservancies in the area manages the summit and is trying to protect some special plants. But I've done this in a couple areas before, in plant conservation areas. Usually they're on hikes that are pretty secluded, so I feel like I'm the only person, and I try to stick strictly to the paths that are already worn. Also, there's some other conservancy areas around the state that don't really advertise, and they say they're private, but I've spoken to people who work for the conservancies, and if you can find access on public land, then they allow you to go. One example is Big Yellow Mountain in the Roan Highlands. But for example, I'm not straying off trail. There's a nice forest road along the summit here, and I'm just gonna stick to that and not go off trail in case any of these plants are endangered. This is an awesome little spot right here. This might be an even better southern view than I got from Snake Mountain. Unfortunately, because I'm hitting this around 3:45 in the afternoon, the sun is pretty bad overhead in the southwest direction, but this is an incredible spot just south of the summit of Rich Mountain Bald. So my goal, I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do it. It's getting a little later than I thought, and I also don't know if there's any sort of trail to it, but that is Tater Hill straight ahead, the sub-peak of this mountain, and I think it's private land just on the other side of that, and people use that as a hang gliding spot. Looks pretty awesome, but it's actually, I don't really care if I make it there because it looks like a very similar view to what I have currently. And with that view, I'll give you some of the peaks. I'm looking east right now, and I think the bigger peaks further east, the next line, that's the northern Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, where the Blue Ridge Parkway snakes along, and the biggest peaks in that direction, wait, never mind. Those might be the Brushy Mountains, my bad. Sometimes I make mistakes. Yeah, that makes sense because I think the escarpment is this first row of peaks about 10 miles to the east, and then it drops, and then the Brushy Mountains are that next long row. And I think I can pick out Poor's Knob, the highest peak in the range. That's that peak dead center. So I guess I can't see in the northeast direction. And this area is Blowing Rock somewhere over those hills on the other side. And then we have a tremendous view south of Grandfather Mountain. And the biggest peak on the left is Callaway, and then it gets super rugged in the middle, and that's where Attic, Window, and McRae peaks are. And then it drops off to the Swinging Bridge and Linville Peak. And then straight ahead we have Hanging Rock and Sugar Mountain, and then Beach Mountain on the right, and the Black Mountains furthest south. And then here we have the Roan Highlands, and the biggest peak dead center, that's Roan Mountain Massif. That's where Roan High Knob and Roan, there's multiple, Cloudland Peak, there's multiple peaks on that massif. And then now dead center, that's Grassy Ridge Bald. Hard to see anything. Earlier I could see Hump Mountain, but it's hard to see it with this sun. And then as you keep going further, there's, I think, Unaka Mountain and Big Bald are the big peaks straight ahead. And then those must be the Great Smokies way in the distance. Here's a view I didn't really get from the summit. Coming back down, you got Snake Mountain, the deep gap between Elk Knob. These are kind of like the twin towers of the Amphibolite range. And then in the distance, you can see the peak poking up on the left. And then straight ahead, it's hard to tell, but that is Three Top Mountain. You can't see all the craggy knobs on top from this angle. And then you have Bluff Mountain on the right. And then Phoenix Mountain is further straight ahead. Pretty cool. Woohoo! I can see the road hundreds and hundreds of feet below. Still steep descent to go. I should have went with my instincts when I started this hike and taken the more wide open forest road type track on the west side of the gap. Instead, when I was down there on the lower slope, I cut across to the east to pick up the track I have on my phone, and that's just horrible thorns, and it goes all the way through all these thorns all the way up. The track I'm on's on the west side, but it is a lot steeper. It's basically straight up with no switchbacks, but it hasn't been choked by thorns at all, which is very nice. I'd rather go up and down a really steep track like this if I could avoid all the thorns. So if you're doing this hike, I'd say stick to the west side gap trails and not that side. There's just so many of them. It's hard to really do it correctly. Just about finished with the hike, almost down to the road. By taking the trails that are on the west side of the slope, I almost completely avoided thorns all the way down, which was great. It was definitely steeper because the trails on the east side over there, they kind of wound back and forth, connecting a bunch of game trails and such. But if you're gonna do this, definitely stick to the west side of the open slope. Even though it's super steep, you'll be thankful. You know, you almost at the gap there. Really nice hike. Not as good as Snake Mountain, but partially the sun affected how I thought of it, because it's basically directly overhead of everything I had from the southern view on Rich Mountain Bald. If I did this in the morning, it'd probably be a lot nicer and I would have enjoyed it more, but it kind of killed some of my photos, and it was harder to pick out what I was seeing, especially in the distance. So I definitely recommend checking this out. That's if access is allowed. I passed a couple hikers coming up, so people know about it. You know, sometimes gates like that, signs like that are outdated. They're in remote locations all around the state, and you know, you never know if it's current, because people are not going to come remove those half the time. But when I get back, I'm gonna, you know, browse the internet, try to figure out what's up with that sign in the barbed wire, and I'll definitely update my YouTube page on whether you're allowed to access the summit. If not, then there's really not much reason to do this hike, because that's where the big views are. Turns out it's going to be 2 hours and 20 minutes, just under 3 miles. It's a very steep hike, very tough. Hope you enjoyed it. This was an awesome weather day. 2 of the most amazing peaks in this corner of North Carolina, and definitely gonna bushwhack a few more in the near future. Later, guys.